Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So we've been out of town a lot lately, and I've been flying into the town where my two sons live with their mom, my ex-wife, to spend time with them. On my normal visitations, I've been flying back to see them. And the three of us, me and my two sons, have been staying at a hotel in the near the town they live in. And a couple times, actually 3 times now, I've gone up in the last few weeks to visit with them. And each one of the times, something massive happens that's not ideal, let's just say, logistically. One of the times my son got really very ill and he was ill in the hotel room. It was a little bit of a mess. Another time, there was logistical problems with the toilet not functioning in the hotel room, and that created a mess. And one other time, I can't remember the middle time, something else happened that was kind of a frustrating experience. I think the swimming pool at the hotel we were at broke, and then something we were supposed to go do didn't work out. So there was just things weren't working out real well. And I remember, I think it was on the second or third trip, I just texted Antonia basically, ha, nothing I can do but laugh about the situation because I can't change it. I just have to go with it. And I'm going to be a laughing Freeman right now. And I just left it at that. And she texted back a heart and said, I love you. Just hang in there. I'll see you in a couple days or whatever. And that phrase, laughing Freeman, actually comes from a quote that I picked up from Timothy Leary as he was describing the Beatles in the 1960s. He was talking about how the Beatles are like a mutant race of people coming down to play their music. And they're basically going to launch a young race of laughing Freemen. And that phrase, a young race of laughing Freemen, has stuck in my head since I read it a couple months ago. I can't get it out of my head. Every time I think about it, it just resonates in there. And what it means to me, this notion of a laughing Freeman, is somebody that shows up to the world that can laugh in the face of things going wrong, can laugh in the face of maybe negative energy or things not working out exactly how you might want them to work out. And you're free, and you are a free person in the world that it's not bound to any rigid way things have to happen. You can laugh about life and take it as it comes. And it's almost become this, quasi loose philosophy I've been playing with for the last few weeks and months, that the more I play with it, the more I'm enjoying it. I've almost like hashtag it out, like laughing Freeman moment, and then explain to somebody like what just happened to me that was kind of funny or weird or absurd in the midst of trauma or struggle. It gives me a framework or a little philosophy to guide my experiences with. So I've been showing up this way, and also in some of the internal work I've been doing, I've noticed how much energy matters in our world. Because I've been flying between 2 locations in the United States on a pretty rapid basis. I've been flying from where I am currently to where my 2 sons live. I've been able to contrast the energies from the current place I'm in to the current energies of where I'm going. And I've been able to notice that, where they're at right now in the world, there's a very dense energy I've picked up, a denseness of maybe it's achievement driven, or maybe there's struggle there or whatever, but there's a denseness. It's a very set energy that feels dense and down and pulling down toward the earth. It's kind of how I perceive it. And then where I'm at now, it's very light energy. It's more open. It's more light. It's more airy. It feels a lot less dense, more open and more expressive. And I'm starting to understand these energies that are playing. So this notion of a laughing Freeman, this young race of laughing Freeman, idea of being able to laugh at whatever comes at you circumstantially, moving through the world in a free way, being able to flow with it. Also with this idea of energy, because certain places, certain people, certain contexts have more dense or more light energy than others. Now, that sounds pretty woo-woo, but I think if you look at your experience in life, you'll probably understand this. You'll notice that certain people you hang around, you feel heavy and burdened around them. And other people you spend time around, you might feel light and free and open about it. So I thought today we could talk about this, unpack it a little bit, have a conversation around it, and find some application maybe for your life, or you can find some applications you listen, let your intuition guide you as you hear our discussion, and pull some things from this you might be able to apply to your own life.
So the area we're in right now, one of the reasons why it's light energy is that we are in one of the primary vacation destinations on the globe. People internationally fly into Orlando to visit Disney World. And we spend our winters down here in like this cute little efficiency, really close to Disney World, maybe like 5 minutes away from it. So we engage with a lot of tourists, and tourists are in a good mood. They have spent a lot of time and effort and planning and scheduling to get here. And while they're here, they're going to have fun, damn it. They're just going to have fun. And so it doesn't matter who you are. I think Disney that's their commercial, or their marketing is bring out your Disney side, which is if you are stoic and serious in every other moment of your life, when you're here, you get to be a big kid again. And people will wave to each other from various forms of transportation, just randomly wave at strangers. They have a lightness in their step. They are driven to smile. They chat each other up in lines for rides. It's just, there's just like a general sense of lightness here. It's one of the reasons why we come here, honestly. We pull a lot of inspiration from the area because it's sunny and warm in the winter, which is something that we get very inspired by. Having lived in Alaska for 4 winters and been like, okay, I've done snow. And then Joel having been like basically raised near one of the largest ski resorts in the mid-Atlantic, you also have had your fill of snow. And so we come down here for the sun, but also because we just love this energy of people, at least temporarily, allowing themselves to be laughing Freemen. They're free for a small amount of time. They're like, everything's going to be okay. Whatever stresses they have, that'll wait for them for later. And so there's just like a general energy of this. And it's made us think about things like what defines happiness for us. How can we keep that sense, that energy of being a laughing Freeman, not just on vacation, but all the time? What do you have to do to be in basically a daily vacation mode? And I think it's this idea that you have permission to do that. You don't just get to do that sometimes at great expense, but you get to do that all the time if you want to. You can see all of life that way, even if you're in a hotel room with a vomiting kid and a broken toilet. Like, you get to be a laughing Freeman in that moment because you have permission. Even if the situation is less than ideal, you can be like, well, that's just what's going on. It ties back in with presence work, which we've talked a lot about, which is being present to the moment without judgment. But then it's like taking that to the next level. It's not just being present without judgment. It's going, I'm going to have fun no matter what, which is also interestingly one of Anthony Robbins' rules, like life rules in his book, Awaken the Giant Within. He says that no matter, like, we all have these life rules. I think we did a podcast on Anthony Robbins' concept of life rules and how a lot of us have these rules about life that are very disempowering. It means that if things don't go exactly a certain way, then we're not going to have a good time, or that's not acceptable. And he said that the most empowering rules are the ones that you're going to have fun no matter what. So I think this concept of the laughing Freeman ties in with this idea of the most empowering position you can be in, which is no matter what situation you're in, like, you can be a laughing Freeman. You can be empowered to have fun.
Yeah, I've seen my experience change because of this. I've been playing with this a lot. So I'm a perceiver. You know, we talk about personality types. I have a tendency to check into my flights late, and Southwest Airlines here in the United States doesn't have assigned seats. So you check into your flight late, you are in the back of the line, and you get pretty much whatever's left. And usually it's a middle seat on an airplane that you're ending up in. And so what I'll do is as I'm walking down near the very end of the line, it's kind of distressing for me. I like to get on the airplane early, actually. I prefer, even though I'm a perceiver, get on early and find a spot for my bag and then get an aisle seat so I can stretch my legs out because I've got really long legs, right?
Well, you're 6'2". Maybe not everybody knows that, but you're 6'2". So for you, getting on the airplane and getting a good position it's kind of a deal breaker for you to get into a place where your legs are smushed, because you are just, you're like this huge, long human accordion. Yeah. But I mean, you're also a thin guy, so you do better maybe than others of your height at being compact, but it's still misery for you. Yeah, it's not real fun. So I'm hoping I can get an aisle seat, but I know this is probably not going to happen. So as I'm walking down the boarding area to get onto the plane, I'm smiling really big, going, please be middle seat. Please be middle seat. And everybody's looking at me like I'm an insane person. Because you're saying it out loud.
I'm saying it out loud. And everybody's looking at me because they're all going to have to sit in middle seats also, right? Well, like, because we're all at the back of the line. And they're looking at me going, why would you wish for that? Why are you making a joke out of this? This is deadly serious. We're all miserable because we're in the back of the line. How can you make this a light, fun thing at all? And people are kind of grumpy. And then there's a couple people that smile and they like laugh knowingly, like, yeah, we all checked in late, so we're going to be the last in the plane. And so you have this, I guess, difference of opinion. Some people are really like grumpy and frustrated about it, and other people are really light and they're like, oh, okay, and they like take my energy and they feed off of it. And all 3 flights, or all 6 flights in the last 3 weeks, 3 times I've flown, I've actually gotten a middle seat every single flight, but they've all been either in an exit row or in the front of the airplane, which has a lot more legroom. So I've actually, weirdly enough, I have no idea how it worked out this way for me. I'm not saying it'll work out for you this way if you're listening. I'm just saying by me expressing energy this way, I haven't been without legroom, even though I didn't have the aisle seat to where I could put my feet out into the aisle and stretch my legs out. I've still been, somehow, the universe provided me with middle seats that were in places that I could stretch my legs out. Weirdly enough, it was a weird experience for me.
But I think what the power of your position or disposition has become is that even if you were cramped, you'd still be a laughing Freeman.
Exactly. And I think what it is, I knew that I was going to be okay no matter where I had to sit in the plane. And yet it still worked out for me. And even if I had gotten less than an ideal seat, there was like a woman and her child that needed to switch. I was willing to actually switch and go sit in a completely different seat, but the person next to me was not. And so we didn't end up standing up and switching seats with this woman and her child, because the person next to me was like, no, I have this seat and this is the one I'm staying in. So there's no point in me getting up. But I was willing to move and make myself more uncomfortable. And I was like, you know what? It's going to be fine. It's a couple-hour flight. I'm going to be happy no matter what. What else can I do? Like, I checked in late. What else can I do? I can fight reality. I can fight against this. I can make myself miserable during this entire trip. Or I can choose to be expressive and happy and open regardless. So I think this, and obviously things have not always gone well. This just happened to work out. I got legroom on the flight. Other times things are kind of crappy. I don't always have things work out. And that's what's great about that. I actually appreciate those more than things working out like the plane, because it allows me to test myself against maybe things that are less than ideal that come into my life. I can test how well I can show up. I'm not perfect at it yet, but I'm getting better and better. The more I practice this, I have some false starts sometimes. Sometimes I lapse. Sometimes I can't maintain that state on a general sense or a general way all the time. But I'm getting better and better the more practice I go at this. And I'm seeing it start to build up a expressive, more open, more joyful, expressed energy in myself.
And there's a sense of emotional resilience about you right now, where nobody can distress your calm. Like there's a sense that you have become almost untouchable, because it's so difficult to disrupt your. What does Jane say on Firefly? She's disrupting my calm. Like, it's almost impossible to disrupt your calm.
To some degree, I think it still happen. I'm worried that I'll get like, pride goes before a fall type thing. Like, I'm arrived. I'm really great at this, so I'm vigilant. But I would agree with you that I certainly have more skill and more practice developed now than I've ever had. And I'm really proud about that. Like in a truly authentic, prideful way. Like, I'm proud of myself that I put the discipline in to become that laughing Freeman in whatever context I'm in. And you notice I'm not talking about being happy necessarily in all circumstances. In the midst of, one of my sons being sick in the hotel and things not working right, it wasn't like I was really happy about it. Like, wow, this is exciting. I'm so happy this happened. It wasn't happy for me. There's a lot of times I don't feel happy. I don't have the emotion or the feeling or the perspective that I am happy right now. It's more a sense of joyful expression in the midst of unhappiness. It's kind of a weird shift, a weird frame shift, but it's not so much circumstantial. It's a state of being no matter the circumstances. I think we tie happiness often to circumstances to some degree. We don't see that as, I could be joyfully expressive even in the midst of unhappiness or in the midst of despair, not to cover over authentic emotions. That's not what I'm saying. Don't write in and say that. I'm just saying you can have joyful expression no matter what context you're in. Happiness seems to be something that's more dependent on the circumstances themselves than you yourself, if that makes sense. And this also leads me to think about something I heard recently on a podcast where the two people on the podcast were talking about happiness. And the one gentleman posited, he said, it's not really about the happiness. It's the expectation of the happiness, of getting that circumstance that quote unquote will make you happy. It's the build up to it. It's the expectation. Once you get that, sometimes people really have a letdown because it was never the thing in the first place. It was the pursuit of happiness that actually made you joyful or happy in the first place. There's a lot of different ways to go with this conversation, but that's also something I've heard recently that I thought was really interesting in the context of happiness, joyful expression, this notion of a laughing Freeman and being able to move freely through the world, joyful no matter the circumstance.
Well, isn't that the biblical definition of hope? That hope is, I'm far enough away from my biblical days that I don't actually remember like the scripture and verse, but I just remember the definition being the assured expectation of things hoped for, the evident demonstration of realities though not beheld. That was the definition of hope. So this idea of an assured expectation of things hoped for, there's a component of joyfulness that is associated with the emotion of hope, assuming that this is not going to be forever, assuming that things will get better. And I think there's also a component there where it's okay if it doesn't for you as an individual, but this idea that things will get better ultimately. And that might sound odd, but I think I kind of get a taste of this myself when I look at world circumstances and I think, some of the coolest things that are coming down the pike for humans, I'm not going to be able to experience them. I'm going to die before they happen. But I have like almost this irrational hope that those things will be happening for humanity. I feel like if we can be responsible enough as like this particular generation in this like tiny little sliver of time that we get to be, like on spaceship Earth, like this little sliver where I get to be a passenger. If we can be responsible enough to try to set a trajectory for future generations so that trajectory sends people off on like better eventualities for humanity, I feel like I have hope that things will eventually get better. And even if I'm not, like, I don't directly experience them, just the idea that things will get better for future generations makes me happy. I just rest into that fun, like that future hope. And things have gotten so much better for humans based on our ancestors setting trajectories. And so I am the beneficiary of other people's hard work in the past. And so I have a much better life because of that. And so it makes me feel good to be a part of that, to be a part of that chain so that future generations will also experience good things. And so I think part of happiness, if we want to call it that, or joyful expression, or being a laughing Freeman, or having the rule, the empowering personal rule that you're going to have fun, is being willing to attach yourself to some hope. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a belief system style of hope, even though my concept of the trajectory is to some extent a belief, right? That's a belief system. It's not a assured thing, but it could easily go that direction. It looks like some information and pattern recognition indicates that things are getting better. So why not continue to get better? And so I feel like it has enough substance and basis in reality to apply some hope there. But I think that just the emotion of hope itself is very rewarding. And I feel like it's not, like you said, it's not even specifically about the emotion of happiness. It's about all of the other emotions that create a system where happiness is one of the emergents. And it's a frequent emergent, like hope and joy and not allowing things to get you down and being emotionally resilient. And for me personally, being in integrity with myself. All of these are components of a system running that if I can tend to them and just, make sure that I keep that hope going and I can keep that joyful expression going and I can keep myself in situations where people have good light energy and keep myself in contexts where I know that I perform better and I emotionally am doing better, then happiness is most likely going to be the emergent of that most often.
Now, you might be sitting here saying, Joel, Antonia, yeah, that might be nice and well, but you have no idea what my life is like. You have no idea who I'm married to. You have no idea what my kids are like. You've got no idea the job I have to go to. You're telling me that I can show up to these maybe terrible things, like really bad situations maybe, that I cannot find a place to be happy. You're telling me I can show up to those and still have joyful expression in the midst of troubles that are coming into my life. That's what you're telling me? Is that what I'm hearing you guys say? And I think we are saying that. We are saying that no matter the circumstance. Now, we have to be careful here. If you're in an abusive situation, if you are in a situation you're being harmed, obviously we're not saying to stay in those situations. What we're saying is, no matter the situation you show up to, you have full and complete control over how you show up there from within. Now, you may not have the skill built. You may not have the permission for it yet. You may not know exactly how to get there. But ultimately, if you're a human being, no one can put emotions into you. Those come from within you. That's where you show up to the world. You bring what you bring to the world. And you have full and total empowerment to show up with a joyful, expressed self, no matter your circumstances. I keep saying that, but that's true. I mean, that is the core of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think that word of skill development is really important. I don't know if every person listening has the ability to show up that way right this second. But you do have the availability to show up that way at some point if you're willing to put the work into it. And the work is hard. I think of this conversation is making me think of the movie. I think it won an Oscar. It's called Life is Beautiful. And it's about a man whose family is thrown into a concentration camp, and he tells his son, in order to help his son get through the experience, that it's all a game. And he acts like a clown, and to his son, who's quite young and doesn't really know what's going on, it all feels like a game to him. And in the face of a concentration camp experience, this person was able to have the emotional resilience to show up as a clown, as basically a laughing Freeman, like we're talking about. And it's not like he just had that necessarily. Or maybe he did. Maybe he's just somebody who's extraordinarily gifted in that way, and may have been, just like some people come out, just like being extraordinary musicians or whatever. Like that could have been just, he was a savant in that way. Because I think it was based on a true story. Regardless, we can get a high level of proficiency in this way, even if we aren't born with it. Like it's a skill to develop at the same time as a talent. And so it's a matter of being willing to put the work into developing it, meaning that you gain resilience by not allowing your stressful circumstances or stressful situation around you, like you not immediately implement this like, well, I don't care and it's not going to impact me. It's a progressive thing. Like you allow yourself to just be present in the moment for a time and go, yep, this is pretty absurd, and just sit with it without having to judge it as being against you or harsh or bad or wrong. You just remove the negative judgment just for a moment. And sometimes that's all you can do. Sometimes you can just sit there and remove the negative judgment for just a second or two. And then the next time you're in that situation, do it for just a little longer. And the next time you're in a situation similar that feels icky, do it for just a little longer, until eventually you're up to like a couple minutes. Eventually you're to a point where you can just sit with the absurdity of it all and just deal with it for a couple minutes before you go back into like, oh, I hate this, right? And eventually you get to a point where you can sustain it for the entire situation. This is almost like a meditation practice. It's a regime you do. And that's why we call it emotional resilience. It's resilience. It's an ability to be flexible in a situation that would break most people. But if you're working on this and you build the skill, eventually it's not a situation that will break you. Eventually it's just a situation that's happening around you, and you can maintain that sense of being a laughing Freeman. And I think that availability to everybody is important to remember at the same time as remembering that it's work. Now, we were going to do a podcast that we called The Fight versus the Work. And we might still do that podcast, but I want to bring in just one of those concepts right now that we were going to talk about in a future podcast potentially. And that is, most of the time we're given this this blueprint that when things are bad or wrong or we don't like something, our job is to fight. Our job is to fight against it and make sure that reality knows that we're not okay with this thing. And sometimes fighting is the appropriate response. Sometimes that's exactly what we need to do. But then there's a difference between the fight and the work. The fight is when you go, reality, I'm not okay with this. The work is all the little microtransactions you're doing every day to become a better version of yourself and to eventually get to a point where you transcend the need to fight. Those are two very different things. So I think of it in terms of being a woman. I think of it in terms of, whether or not I want to fight something like sexism. As a woman, it's very tempting and seductive to go be a part of the fight, which is like, you're not allowed to treat me this way. I am not going to allow you to, and fill in the blank of all the different ways that women are not treated very well. There's a lot of things to fight against. But then on the other side, there's the work. And the work for me is to become the most excellent version of myself to a point where I transcend anybody else's sexism. As in, like, if somebody behaves sexist towards me, that doesn't impact me in the least because my life is not at all dependent upon their opinion of me. That I have crafted a life 100% that is based on my own like empowerment and situation. And maybe I'll be in a situation where like other people's sexism impact an eventuality or an outcome that I would have liked to have seen go a different way. But that I have done enough work where I just transcend that and go, well, that's what that was. And then I move on to the next thing. Those are two very different things. The fight is different than the work. And what we're talking about in order to get to the level of a laughing Freeman is not fight. It's not resisting reality. It's not saying you can't treat me this way. It's work. It's all of those, again, those little microtransactions you do every day that allow you to build a sense of resilience, emotional and intellectual resilience, where you can transcend the situations that would otherwise cause you distress.
What we end up doing as humans is we work so hard to build all these systems and frameworks at the onset to avoid future hassle, future icky emotion, future feeling bad or feeling unhappy. So we create all this structure around us to try to prevent that. And then because we've spent so much time constructing all this to make sure things go well, when they don't go well, we don't have a lot of inner tools. We don't have a lot of resource to deal with this now, except to try to create more structure, fight against it, build more things to avoid reality, avoid what's going to happen, all in an attempt to avoid and distance ourselves from possible negative emotion or negative dense energy. Whereas I think what we're talking about with this work is you can't predict what happens to you in life. It's going to be impossible. I've tried it. I've tried to construct systems to prevent hassle. I don't really enjoy getting sick, right? I don't like it. For some reason, it activates my introverted sensing inferior process and my ENFP personality. It makes me feel like I'm never going to feel better. I'm going to be sick forever. I'm going to feel like this forever. I'm going to die alone and miserable when I'm sick. Like my mind gets taken over by whatever I'm sick with and I can't shake it.
It's true. You're so pathetic.
Like I'm not a bad patient. Like I'm not a bad patient. When you say pathetic, I just want to be clear what you mean. I'm pathetic in that I literally think that I'm going to die the way I am right now when I'm ill.
Okay, I'll use the word pitiful.
Pitiful.
It's very pitiful.
It is pitiful. Because I believe that I'm not going to get better. This is never going to go away. So I've constructed a lot of ways that I try to avoid getting sick in my life. And yet I can't fully do that. Like I live in the world where I have to touch objects, doorknobs. I try to wash my hands, but I still end up coming down with viruses and bacterial infections. And I have to take medicine or I've got to recover from those. And so I have to learn how to, in my illnesses, understand that I'm not going to die alone and miserable at the end of my life just because I got sick right now. This too will pass, and I can actually have, even in the midst of feeling awful, I can also have joyful expression. So we construct all these things in our world to try to prevent bad things from happening, these bad emotions from coming into our lives. And then when they do, we have no way to deal with them. Wouldn't it be better first to start with a construction of, it doesn't matter what comes into my life, I'm going to show up owning myself and how I express myself. I'm going to show up with joyful expression no matter the circumstance because I can't control the circumstance. That's impossible. By definition, life happens around me and to me in some ways that I just can't control. So this is what we're talking about. This idea of the work is showing up to life, being able to take whatever it throws at you. And you are, when you come to life in that empowered frame, you have so much personal power. You have so much personal choice, personal Freeman. You can show up as a laughing Freeman in that context.
Yeah, and I think this kind of comes back to some podcasts that we did last year where we talked about having control of your emotional state. And that's why you mentioned, I'm not saying don't go ahead and feel your authentic emotions. Please don't write in. Because when we talked about that last year, we got a lot of feedback. No, it's not okay to not feel your authentic expressions. And I'm with you. I think that we can't bottle those up. If we don't feel our authentic expressions, it's not like they go anywhere. They just stay in there and then they create some toxicity. And oftentimes it's a bad deal. So when we talk about the work, like that's I want to create that distinction between the fight and the work again. I mean, again, sometimes it's good to fight. I'm not trying to indicate that fighting is always the inappropriate response. Sometimes fighting is a good response. But in this particular situation that we're talking about with the skill building, ignoring your authentic expression if it's down, right? If it's not this, like we're talking about joy and hope and laughing Freeman, etc. If it's on, the other side of the emotional wheelhouse, then to pretend it doesn't exist or suppress it, that would be fighting. And we're not talking about fighting. We're talking about doing the work. So allow yourself to feel your authentic natural expressions. This is not about fighting or resisting those. It's about being in situations that would normally take you out and letting yourself over time build the skill of being able to just sit with it and not have to experience it as bad. It's giving you permission to not have to do the knee-jerk response or the trigger reaction or the pre-programmed response to negative things that you have to necessarily feel bad about them. Because there is some programming in there too. We can be programmed. We can take over our own programming and say, I can feel a different feeling when I'm going through these situations and circumstances. So again, it's not about fighting. It's not about resisting reality. It's about accepting reality and then doing your own inner work while you're experiencing those things. Again, they're called microtransactions because they're happening little tiny transactions throughout the entire day. And you have not control over most of them. Most of them are out of your control until you wrest control of them. And then as you notice, if you can do it like just for a few seconds or maybe for a full minute or whatever, you'll find that you have more control over these little microtransactions within you. Eventually get to a spot or a place where you can do your own emotional Aikido. Now, I say this as not an ENFP. I say this as an ENTP, where the cognitive function of introverted feeling, or what we call authenticity, that is not really talk about not in a wheelhouse. Like that is as far away from me in my cognitive function stack. I mean, I understand BB's model and I know where it falls, but as far as I'm concerned, it might be my weakest function. I am not good at doing emotional Aikido, but I have built some skill and developed some spaces and ways to be in my wheelhouse, get into my introverted thinking process, to get very still and to get very not calculated or cold, but to just get really present and to really go, okay, what do I believe is actually happening here? What is reality as it's being presented? What would be absurd for me to resist, right? Like, because reality is reality. And if I resist it, all I'm going to do is create more problems for myself. So I have gotten to a place where I can get like really, really in my introverted thinking process. And it helps me with my emotional space because I've gotten to a place where that feels so good. It feels so good to accept reality as it is and to not resist it that I want to keep rewarding myself. I mean, I end up unconsciously rewarding myself by being there. So I think that this can happen no matter what your cognitive function stack is, no matter what your personality type is. You can find a way to access those parts inside of you, even if your introverted process is not thinking or feeling. It's not one of the judging processes. Let's say your introverted process, that's one of your first two in your car model. Let's say it's intuition or sensing. That's even better in some ways because that is a place that doesn't make value judgments. That is a space that allows you to just look at things sort of philosophically and just rest into whatever's happening and accept it as it is. So I almost think that as perceivers, we have a little bit of a worse time of it because we automatically want to go to judging the situation as it's making us feel or whatever's happening internally. But regardless, no matter what your type is, what the introverted process that you're using as either your driver or as your co-pilot, that's the place you go when you're doing this work. And you go into that internal space and you calibrate to where you're at and just allow yourself to sit there for a couple minutes. And then again, over time, you build the skill of being able to do it more and more. And now I look at Joel. I mean, Joel's light years ahead of me on this, but I look at Joel and you can do it almost all the time. Like almost 100% of the time, you're 100% deciding what your emotional state is going to be. It's actually incredibly impressive. And
talk about pressure. No,
yeah.
no, I can't mess up ever. No, I don't. Okay, I appreciate that.
I'm not saying that because you have to show up as like this a paragon.
So, someone's gonna come to like a live event we run, and I'm like gonna have like a meltdown and this like, why did this not get set up? The camera's not working. And they're like blow this whole thing out.
Yeah.
Like, Which could happen. Like, I mean, I still have struggle. I don't want to mischaracterize myself, I guess is what I'm trying to do here.
Yeah, well, okay, so I'll just say this. I haven't seen you have a blow up in an extremely long time. And this is when you were working actively on your introverted feeling process, you were having blow-ups on a regular basis. And I think you just cycled that through. You just figured it out.
Yeah.
And so I stand in awe of what you've been able to accomplish through the work that you've done. But regardless, I don't think that this is unavailable to anybody. I think no matter who you are and no matter what your type is, finding that space inside of yourself that you can just rest into and know that you're your own ballast. Internally, you find that space where you have and think of them as microtransactions on a very tiny little small space. You have the ability to just rest into your own, whatever is going on for you, whatever's reality for you, and just go, that's kind of interesting or absurd or a shrug or whatever. And then if the situation pulls you back into a negative space, that's okay. Like, that's just where you're at. However, over time, you can build this skill. And I do believe it's available to everybody to become what you define as a laughing Freeman.
I know that our daughter Piper, she's 4.5 right now, time of this recording, she's the one that can trigger you a lot. I mean, you have that extroverted feeling 10-year-old process, and it's based on getting people's needs met, creating harmony, and that's really what you use to mother, but it's not necessarily the most strong part of your personality. It's something you use, and you developed a lot. We've talked about this when we talked about the tertiary process. How do you maybe give me a little example framework how you do it? Because I know how I show up to the world and kind of hold emotion and shift. Maybe there's an example you have when you're dealing with Piper and something happened, it triggered you, and you've been able to pull yourself out of that or shift your emotional perspective. Just as another example for you listening, I was wondering if you might be able to do that, Antonia, if you have one.
Okay. I'll figure something out quick. That's a good question. So I think that, we have an example earlier today where you just got back from one of the weekends with your kids, and it was another cluster weekend where things were not going well, and you got back, you held your emotional space well, but you were tired. Like, it's exhausting. Like, I think that's probably something that should be acknowledged, is that the work is tiring. You can stay there, but you will take an energetic hit if there's a situation that is extreme. So you came back pretty tired, and I was like, yeah, you get your needs met, get back into a really good space. And so we were driving in the car, and when you're tired, you don't have extroverted feeling in your stack. And so you're not necessarily the most attentive to Piper in those times, and it usually falls on me. And what was happening is she was very needy today in conversation. Like, she literally just ran her cute little 4.5-year-old mouth for, I don't know, probably 2 hours straight. And not just the cute, but like, mommy, I asked you a question, like, very demanding of attention. And so I'm trying to listen to her, and she's going through pictures of our trip to one of the parks at Disney, and she's like talking about it and reviewing it, etc. And you were sitting next to me in the car, and you weren't really conscious of her talking to me in the back. So you started talking to me simultaneously. And you also wanted answers. Like, I asked you a question, or like, hey, what is that thing? And so, like, I had two people talking to me that wanted interaction and response. And it kind of blew my little FE tertiary, or like extroverted feeling 10-year-old gasket. Like, I just went kaboom. And I'm trying to drive at the same time on a freeway, and it was like a moment where I just didn't, I had the head explode thing, right? So I pull over, and I'm instantly in a frazzled state, because my 10-year-old process is something I'm aware enough of, but I'm not good at it. So it is like absolutely the spot that will have me blow a gasket faster than anything else. And instead of getting mad, which was my default was to get upset, right?
I could see it brewing.
Yeah. I was like, and you're like, what's going on? What's the problem? What's happening? And that's kind of the worst thing for me in those moments, because I'm trying to get out of my extroverted feeling process and into my introverted thinking. So if you kind of go, what, you're like, you just like, you're on me, right? You want to know, because your introverted feeling knows something's off. Like, you know that something's going on with me. So now you need feedback about what's going on for me. And I'm just like, oh, so So then it's a matter of me trying to fight to be in an introverted thinking space where you're trying to pull me back into extroverted feeling in order to help manage the relationship between the two of us. And I'm just like, dude, you cannot, right? So then I just stop and I look at you and I'm like, everything's fine, but here's what's going on for me.
You got super cold and calculated at this point.
I wouldn't say cold and calculated. I would characterize it as like calm and present. I don't think it was cold and calculated. I like to define it as, was it cold and calculated? Because that's...
I could see somebody, okay. I know that's not your nature. Like, you weren't being cold and calculated, but I could see that's like to paint a word picture of what the energy felt like, to me at least.
Okay.
That's what it felt like.
All right. That's fine. I like to think of it as present and calm. And I just went, okay, let me explain just what happened for me. And throughout the entire explanation, I made sure to say, and I'm not blaming you and I'm not making a value judgment. Like, because you were like, oh, now I'm going to start feeling shame. And I'm like, do not feel like, if you feel shame, that is because that's on you. And I'm not projecting any shame onto you because I don't think you've done anything for which you should feel shame. However, this is what's happening for me. And so I'm experiencing this right now, which is why I'm probably a little distant from you at the moment, and go do the thing that you need to do. And I'll go do the thing I need to do. And I think that's probably how I stay in my introverted thinking process, is that I just demand of myself to get to a space where I am I understand what's happening in as radically honest language as possible, which means I remove judgment. Nobody did anything to me. Nobody had ill intent. This was not a situation where you and Piper were like colluding to make sure that I blew a gasket. This is just stuff that happened. And so I work really hard to make sure that I'm not judging anybody in the situation as being bad, wrong, or doing anything against me. And I think that rigorous, like, that's my work. My work is to not project onto other people that they're doing it to me. My work is to make sure that I'm in as pure a TI or introverted thinking space as humanly possible, so that I'm not saying that other people are bad guys or projecting any sort of emotional blame onto others, because that's what would put me in my tertiary version of extroverted feeling. So that's what I work on. And I think, again, no matter what personality type you are, you can find this version for yourself. What is the introverted cognitive function that you're using for your type? And what is the space you can get to that doesn't have judgment necessarily, isn't in a space where it's trying to find the bad guy, but can just sit with the experience and figure it out and understand more about yourself in that moment, and then build a discipline of being present within yourself, that inner ballast, for as long as possible during each of these transactions. And then eventually get to a point where you can just be there.
And again, let's reiterate, we're not talking about something that happens overnight. It takes discipline, it takes practice, it takes time, and it burns a lot of energy. Often it can take a lot of energy out of you. So you have to have recovery periods put in. I think that's one of the things I've been struggling with in the last week or two, is I've been holding some emotional space for a long period of time for certain energies in my life. I'm not talking about you, Antonia. I'm talking about other people that I've had to hold energy for. And I haven't had a lot of breaks. I've been running a lot. And so I've realized, and this is what we had a conversation about yesterday, is, hey, I need some time to replenish, to rejuvenate my juices. I can't keep going endlessly. And that's something I'm learning to calibrate against. So it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It takes discipline. It takes time. It's something you have to build a practice around. And also it's going to burn energy, and you have to account for that. So those are things to keep in mind as you start to go down the road of showing up to the world, no matter the circumstance, with joyful expression. I can't express how amazing it is when you can tap into this, and how fun life can be, and how much more control and empowerment you feel as you move through things.
Yeah.
Like, it's changed me in a lot of ways that I'm very happy about. I feel really good about. And I'm really grateful that I've done the work to the degree I have, and there's still more to do, but I'm really grateful I've gotten to this place, and I feel so good about it.
Yeah, I think to some extent, judges are going to have a little bit easier of a time of building in that recovery piece. I think especially the introverted judgers, like the IJs, I think most introverted judgers know that they need to build in recovery time.
Yeah.
Like energy management is already so massively on their radar. So making sure they have some recovery time. But I think for EJs, it might be a little bit difficult to make sure that you put in that recovery time, because you shouldn't have to, quote unquote. Like, you should just be a machine that just keeps going. I think that's the number one thing for EJs. For IJs, I think maybe one of the struggles might not be building in recovery time, but it might be willing to be vulnerable. be willing to put themselves in a position where they experience the things that will test their mettle. That might be tough. To not just want to always prevent and build systems to prevent any badness, but actually put themselves out there in situations that might hurt a little bit. That might be the thing that's the challenge for an IJ. I think for IPs, the challenge sometimes is not thinking that like everything is happening to you, because IPs are in a situation where I think that they do have a lot of struggles. I think actually all the types have struggles, but that are very distinctive to them. But I think for IPs, a lot of times it's not just kind of seeing everything as sort of being like you're on the receiving end of everything. Like the world is just throwing all this BS at you and you have to just deal with it. I think it's a matter of finding that space where you recognize that the world isn't doing things to you, but that you still have to, you still have to sit with it. And being willing to go out into the world and also put yourself in a vulnerable position to not just build a wall around you, but also experience those things that will test your mettle. And I think for people that are EPs, it's I think our biggest challenge is actually doing the work and not just pretending. Like it's very easy for EPs to pretend to be laughing Freeman because we can be in performance mode so easy. But for us, it's actually being willing to do the work. To make it authentic, make it true for us.
Make it sustainable.
Yeah, make it sustainable, not just something where you pretend to be that kind of person and then go back and rage at your spouse or whatever.
Yeah. What do you think? You've been here with us without a microphone. Come over to personalityhacker.com and leave a comment or ask a question directly below this show. We want to know what you think about this topic, how you're showing up to the world. Are you struggling with coming to the world in joyful expression? Is this something you figured out? Do you have strategies that you can share with us and the community here at Personality Hacker? And speaking of community, if you want to join a community of like minds, people that think very similar to you, they're growth-oriented, they love frameworks and models like typology to use them to grow as people, come over to facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack. It's a great place to join a growing group of like minds and share ideas and cross-pollinate.
Yeah. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you would like to give us a gift, you can leave us a rating review on iTunes. It helps us out a lot.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.